Welcome, West Hollywood. I'm so excited for our video today and our Facebook and YouTube Live. We have William Bowen, who is an extraordinary litigator and is a tenants' rights attorney here with us. And without further ado, I'm going to bring him on so we can get started and talk about renters' rights, which is so important, crucial right now. Hi, Will. How are you?
Sepi, I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. Please tell us about your background in tenants' rights law and a little bit about yourself.
Sure thing. So I started off in law practice at a large law firm, like most lawyers do, doing intellectual property litigation. And at some point, I decided I wanted to be more of a community lawyer. So I launched out as a solo practitioner. And one of the first things that I had some of my friends and clients bring to me were matters where they were being victimized by predatory investors who'd bought their buildings and were proceeding to harass the tenants to kick them out so that they could turn the building into an Airbnb. And this is very traumatic for these tenants who've been long-term renters and who had really considered their apartments their home and had built a strong artists community within the building. And ever since litigating for them and helping them against some of these predatory investors, it's become a part of my practice, and it's something I believe very passionately in.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. I really wanted to do this live stream. I don't know if, I just want to say that West Hollywood, as of our last demographic study, we're 71% renters, which means thousands of people that are now dealing with not just the typical renters issues, but with the pandemic and moratorium. And I've been hearing from a lot of renters that they've been getting harassed by tenants. And part of my platform really is for us to create a much stronger tenant harassment ordinance that has some really good teeth. But I want to just talk to you. I know that you know about the West Hollywood tenant harassment ordinance. I'd like us to really adopt what Santa Monica has done with their tenant harassment ordinance. And I want you to talk about that. Can you tell us what your thoughts are on the West Hollywood one versus Santa Monica tenant harassment ordinance?
Absolutely. I've reviewed this as well, and as a preliminary matter, I think this is a really important issue because, as I've mentioned, part of the problems that I've seen tenants face is that tenants can have a lot of rights in court, and if they're willing to sit through and be harassed and made miserable by their landlords for months and months, I can help keep them in their houses despite this. But the unfortunate thing that I've had to deal with a lot of tenants as they've worked with me is that they continue to be harassed. Even after litigation has been filed, their landlords continue to do things that make them so miserable that they say, nothing is worth dealing with this. Why does this happen? It happens because these harassing tactics often are illegal, but landlords aren't held accountable because there's no mechanism to hold them accountable. And I do get that question all the time. I say, how is this legal? How can they do this? And I say, well, it's because it's not enforced, and they know that it's illegal, but they're not going to be held accountable. So it is really important to have a tenants harassment ordinance that has some teeth so that some of these illegal tactics aren't used against tenants to make them so unhappy that they leave because they're miserable in their homes. And I reviewed both the Santa Monica and the West Hollywood ordinance in terms of tenant harassment. And when you talk about teeth, I think that's really one of the big problems of West Hollywood's ordinance. Essentially the biggest civil consequence that a landlord will face under this is that if they win in a lawsuit with the assistance of the city, which they would have to get the city's assistance, then
The tenant, yeah.
they might be able to get the rent back, get back what they paid. Contrast this with other eviction moratorium protections and other tenant harassment protections in Santa Monica. There are much more substantial fees and fines if they choose to do that. They can fine $10,000 per violation for the Santa Monica ordinance for harassment. And if somebody's looking at doing something small, like it may not seem small, like posting a false notice, like posting harassing notice to inspect the apartment. You know, I had some tenants that had a landlord come in, you know, videotape the entire interior of their apartment and post it on the internet for everybody to see, so they could advertise for the newest people that they plan to bring in. Those kind of things, they would think twice about doing those kind of things if it's going to cost them $10,000 each time they do it.
Yeah, so it would be a great deterrent to harassment.
Exactly. And that's exactly what's needed. And, you know, I mean, it's disappointing that we don't have the same level of deterrence in this ordinance that we do other places. I mean, you know, speaking of the pandemic, even there's a federal eviction moratorium in place that, you know, provides for fines that can be $100,000, $200,000 for landlords that take improper actions during this. And, you know, I don't think West Hollywood wants to be behind the federal government in protecting its renters. So we need to reform and get better.
Exactly. And that federal eviction provisions, moratorium provisions, are from September to the end of December, correct?
That's
the federal one. Okay.
By the CDC.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. Now, this is speaking of eviction moratoriums. We love, our campaign loves pets. It's good. Oh, there she is.
This is our alarm system. Our alarm system is our dog, and
that's great.
So I asked for some. She just needs to check things out, but she's fine. She seems to be fine. So.
Chloe, our pup Chloe is our alarm system too. She's wonderful. But this leads us right into the next area when we brought up the eviction moratorium. As you know, the city of West Hollywood passed an eviction moratorium right at the beginning of the pandemic. We were actually the first city to do so before the city of LA. However, there were some flaws and some things missing, and I want to talk about that. City of LA had in their moratorium that the landlords were required to let the tenants know, send notice to the tenants of what the moratorium was, but the city of West Hollywood didn't include that provision. What are your thoughts on how that affected renters potentially?
It affects people really severely, and I'll say it affects the most vulnerable renters. So in my experience as an eviction attorney is a lot of times what really harms tenants is that tenants have a lot of rights that they may not know about. And not every tenant knows where to seek legal help. Not every tenant has, you know, the budget to seek legal help other than trying to figure things out on their own. So if they're not provided information, it's very easy for landlords to simply, you know, push things that aren't true. And I've seen that happen all the time. In fact, a lot of times clients that come to me, I look back in their history and see what's happened before I got involved. And the landlord's done a lot of illegal things, presuming they don't know their rights. So it's really important for people to be informed of that. And I'll say the city of Los Angeles, you know, I've talked to other clients and they are more aware. They do understand. When the notices are given, you know, declarations are provided that are very simple to use for tenants that may not have easy access to legal representation. And that's really important because access to justice, you know, you can only get justice if you have access to justice. You can only enforce your rights if you know your rights. Exactly. And so I think that's vital.
Yeah, absolutely. The other part of our assistance, so City of West Hollywood has a lot of different social services that are offered to our residents. It's incredible. One of them before the pandemic was rental assistance from a few different organizations. The more broad acceptance-based organization that most people would qualify for is NCJW did a program partnership with West Hollywood where, for example, I'm a renter, and if I lost my job, I could apply once a year and I would get up to $1,000 worth of assistance. So what the City of West Hollywood did during this pandemic is they increased that slowly, gradually from 1 month to then 2 months and then to 3 months. Although, you know, I was fighting at City Hall talking about how it's 1,000 is not enough because our average rents in West Hollywood are 1,000, you know, about $1,800 almost. So $1,000 is great, but what's going to happen to the people that have all this extra money left over before October? And I want to pose that question to you as a tenants' rights attorney. All that money that they still owe. I know for West Hollywood, our renters don't need to pay back the amount of money they still owe to their landlords for 12 months after the eviction moratorium is lifted, and it hasn't been lifted yet. But once it's lifted, what do tenants do? Because I feel like landlords are going to start bugging them to get into contractual agreements, sign an agreement, get into monthly installments. Where is this going to put renters?
Well, where is it going to put renters? And where is it even going to put landlords? I mean, there are many good landlords out there. They're not all villainous people. I'm a tenants advocate, but I believe that there's good landlords, and honestly, having adequate rental assistance is something that helps everybody, tenants and landlords both. And $1,000. I think, in my observation, this is going to happen even before the eviction moratorium ends, because unfortunately, I'm witnessing a lot of situations where landlords that are not getting the rent, even though there is this protection, are still doing these harassment techniques that we talked about to get the rent. And $1,000, you're right, it's not going to go. $1,000 is not going to go to cover enough rent for enough people that it's, the ideal solution is obviously that people can feel comfortable, they can pay their rent, the landlords can receive the rent, and everybody wins in that situation. So, I don't think that there's any advantage in having rental assistance that won't help cover a normal amount of rent. And certainly after the moratorium ends and people are under heavy pressure to pay this money back, even if they move out, they still might have a civil judgment that they would have to pay off, and having somebody have poor credit because they can't do that is also not ideal. So I think for overall financial health, mental health of all of our residents, tenants, and landlords, I would be strongly in favor of generous rental assistance. And it's also my understanding that that after the eviction moratorium went into place, that in many cases the amount of assistance available was actually reduced to 25%. And that's that doesn't really help anybody. Very few people are going to be helped very much by $250 on either side.
Yeah. Well, so just to put that into context, after Governor Newsom passed the latest eviction moratorium provisions that started October, the city, which I'll let you talk more about that, but basically now tenants are required to pay 25% of their rent and show documentation. And it is extensive documentation. It's not just a little declaration, documentation that you are indeed suffering as a result of this pandemic. You have to pay 25% of your rent, and then you could forego the rest for now. So you could postpone that, and then once the moratorium lifts, instead of, if you don't have, let's say you put off $4,000 and the moratorium lifts, from the money that you have not paid from October to when the moratorium lifts, right? Then that money, instead of the landlord saying, okay, well, we're going to evict you because you didn't pay it, it basically turns into debt. And what can the landlord do at that point? And what do renters need to be aware of?
Well, renters need to be aware that it's still a debt. I mean, they can still come after you the same way that if you've got a credit card bill for $4,000 that if somebody's behind on, they can come after you for that. And it doesn't behoove anybody that's a renter to have potential problems with their credits. If people may need to move at some point, they're going to have to face another credit check, and they don't want a judgment or any kind of negative mark on their record having to do with debts that are connected to this period of time when they couldn't even earn money through no fault of their own.
Right.
So I think that's really important to find ways to assist renters on that. But I also do think it's important for people to be aware that there is a difference between a civil judgment and something that can allow them to be evicted. So
Yes.
so that's it's important to it's important to be informed on that so that at least you can have the peace of mind of knowing it won't immediately affect your home. Still, nobody benefits from long-term debt hanging over their head.
Yes, absolutely. And so just to tie it into what you were saying with the 25%, the city of West Hollywood, rather than now, as of October, paying the $1,000 for up to 3 months, they reduced the assistance to, you can get the 25% that you owe from your rent instead of $1,000. So that's what's happening. And I'm not so sure if I agree with that. And then they've said that maybe in the future they'll cover the rest, but it's not in any ordinance right now. So it's actually not a remedy that's available yet. I want to talk to you about one more key difference between the City of LA's moratorium and the City of West Hollywood. It's another thing that I brought up at City Council, is the fact that the City of LA had an Ellis Act protection provision in their moratorium, but the City of West Hollywood does not. So can you explain to our renters that are watching what the Ellis Act is, what exactly that means, what the difference means for those living in LA versus West Hollywood?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I appreciate you bringing it up, and it's a really important thing to do as somebody who cares about tenants, because something a lot of people don't understand until they face this and they're up against it is that landlords, if they decide that the tenants are too difficult or they're frustrated with them in any way, the Ellis Act is part of a set of provisions in the law for what's called no-fault eviction, where the landlord doesn't even have to prove that you did anything wrong, that you missed the rent, that you are violating some kind of provision in the lease, that you're harassing anybody. You can be paying your rent, you can be doing everything right. And the landlord can say to you, I just don't want to be a landlord anymore. I don't want to be a landlord. I'm going out of business. We're taking your rental unit off the market. Now move. And this is unfortunate for a lot of tenants, because for a lot of tenants, this is their home. Also, unfortunately, the hard reality is, and I can say this as a litigator who's watched this in court with these no-fault evictions, sometimes that's not what they're doing. Sometimes the goal is they start these evictions, they get the tenants out, and then they go ahead and raise the rent anyway. I had that happen with a no-fault eviction where there was an allegation that the family was going to move in, that the landlord was going to move their family in. And then we saw, of course, this place re-advertised on Zillow for substantially more rent. So there's a lot of people that especially, again, predatory investors who use the Ellis Act improperly to backdoor evictions just because they want tenants out. And there's not a lot that you can do sometimes if people try to use this Ellis Act. So that's why these protections exist. And it's really, really important to have Ellis Act protections in place for tenants, because again, from the perspective of the real estate industry, and this isn't entirely nefarious, it's just their business, but they're looking at a piece of property as a financial investment. But as we know in Hollywood, for a lot of people, their apartment is their home. They've designed things the way they like them. I mean, as you can see, we live in an apartment. I'm working from home because of COVID, and and we work hard to make this a space that is joyous for us and get to know our neighbors and have a lovely community. It's not just a financial investment or a place to live for now. This is really a place that's our home, and I've seen that with so many tenants. And the problem with not having Ellis Act protections is that that can be very easily undone by landlords who've decided that they just want the property so that they can kick people out and raise the rent, and that's not right.
Yeah, so during the moratorium in LA, they have a Ellis Act protection, which means that the landlords cannot do that, at least during this horrible pandemic we're in. But City of West Hollywood had not done that. So you talked about, you and I had discussed on our own how the landlord industry has changed from when the city was founded to now, and from 1984 to 2020, as far as who the majority of a lot of the landlords are. And I want you to touch on that a little bit.
Sure thing. I think that makes a big difference too. It makes a big difference in terms of people's incentives in terms of how much they care. I mean, there've always been difficult landlords. You know, they've been good landlords and difficult landlords. You know, going back to the beginning of time. But the difference is that, you know, for a long time the landlords still were members of the community, and increasingly
like mom and pops, like small landlords. Yeah.
Ultimately, other people in West Hollywood who were renting out, who bought a building, local community, real estate professionals that wanted to create a community and were part of that community. And they had an interest in making their tenants happy, had an interest in being reasonable with their tenants. Well, and also, frankly, because of property values, it used to be a market where landlords wanted to make buildings a welcoming place for their tenants because they were looking to fill units, and that was a challenge. Yeah. And unfortunately, the overall housing market has changed, where there's a very different attitude sometimes, but it's also who the players are. Given how high property values are in California, given how high housing costs are, given how high market rents are in California, there's a lot of people who are now coming into West Hollywood who are not part of the community and who are looking at this as an opportunity to make money and not be part of the community. Large corporate entities, corporate property management companies and landlords who are not based in West Hollywood, who know nothing about West Hollywood other than that it's a community that where there is high property values. Some investors from out of state, some investors from out of country, and my first case actually being a tenants' rights advocate, that was exactly what happened. There was a foreign investor that bought the building and said, I want to evict everybody and create my own Hollywood-based Airbnb theme pad. Yeah. And put it right on the internet, put it right out there, right on the internet for everybody to see. And every tenant that was evicted in this community, which was a lovely community of artists that loved each other and had lived there for years together in community, said, 1 down, 3 to go each time a tenant was knocked out. So it's not the same thing where people are part of the communities that they are property owners for, and that makes a difference, and that's why these protections really need to be in place. It also means there's a lot of money behind some of this, and that when tenants get in court, they can be facing serious litigation outfits that have a lot of resources, and if they're very determined to get somebody out, it can be very, they really have a lot of resources to do it. And so tenants need resources and they need protection on their side.
All the more reason for us to really strengthen our tenant harassment ordinance, more so now than ever. Absolutely. You talked a little bit about Airbnbs. That has really been a problematic issue in West Hollywood. Until a few months ago, our ordinance said that anyone you couldn't do an Airbnb under 31 days. Now, as a result of a settlement of a lawsuit with a luxury short-term rental company, the city went ahead and included a provision that created a 1-year minimum for short-term rentals in our city. But when it comes to enforcement, I've heard this before, and I'm still hearing it, that landlords, when rent-stabilized units are emptied, they still Airbnb it rather than renting it out to us, or they have a corporation get the lease, sign the lease, and then they use the corporation as a front to rent out the unit as Airbnb. So then our rent-stabilized housing gets smaller, and prices keep going up higher, and the community doesn't benefit. Now the city of West Hollywood does have the 1-year minimum, but we're still having the issues we had before, and I think we need to really strengthen our code compliance department and have more people that are able to really enforce this ordinance, or else it means nothing. Let's talk about that enforcement in general and the lack of it, and what solutions you think there might be to this issue. And I know it's not just in West Hollywood, but in LA too.
Well, yeah, it's all across LA County, and speaking about enforcement, speaking about the determination with which uh, some some interests in these property want to get rid of rent stabilized housing, want to get rid of renting to tenants at all, and want Airbnb. I'll tell you this. In this case, I litigated early on, where I assisted some tenants to find other housing. One of the other tenants, who I also litigated on behalf of, after that, was so determined to make this apartment entirely Airbnb and kick everybody out that an eviction was proceeded against while the tenant was visiting her elderly mother in Florida who was dying of cancer, and left a house sitter in the house. And while the house sitter was in the house, that was construed as a sublease violation. And they went ahead and evicted her after she came back, and her parents had died, and she was left without her home. And then and during that process, while she was fighting it too, they were so determined that they posted a false Facebook account using her name, and and some limited unflattering photos where they accused her of being a criminal. They accused her of drug violations. They smeared her family all over Facebook. And these things can't happen. These kinds of harassment can't happen, because this is when people say they may have the right to be where they are. They may have done everything right, but the landlord's willing to make their lives so miserable that they say, this can't be my home when my name is being dragged through the mud, when I'm being constantly harassed day by day. And so there needs to be teeth in these enforcement mechanisms. There needs to be a way to say, if you're going to take those kind of steps, if you're going to smear somebody all across the internet, if you're going to even something smaller, just little things to drive people crazy, which I know also happens. I've seen it. It's going to cost you. It's going to cost you. So
Absolutely.
It's got to be in place.
Absolutely. Well, this was incredible. I also want to let our renters that are watching know, definitely contact City Hall. If you're having issues, go to weho.org, read all about the eviction moratorium that is in place, and all of the social services and rental assistance available to you. 25% is still 25%. Take advantage of that, and contact me anytime you need to as well. We loved having you. I really appreciate you. Thank you for your service to renters, and it was wonderful having you. I appreciate it.
This was an absolute joy, Sepi, and I'm so grateful for your candidacy. I'm behind you, and I hope to see you in office very, very soon. So thank you for all your work, and thank you for all your advocacy on behalf of the community, and on behalf of renters as well. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Will. Bye.
Bye.
My name is Sepi Shyne. I have been a renter in West Hollywood for 11 years, and I love our city, which is why I am running to be your voice on the City Council. Women like me were never supposed to run for office. I spent the first 16 years of my life in America as an undocumented immigrant. My parents worked hard every day to contribute to our community and achieve the American dream. Their sacrifices taught me the value of hard work, the importance of listening to and fighting for every person, not just some. Now, I run 2 small businesses, serve the residents of West Hollywood as a city commissioner, and continue to fight for civil rights. We are living in unprecedented times that require new leaders at the table to ensure we protect our most vulnerable residents. Our rents continue to rise, and our small businesses continue to close their doors because they can't compete with the gentrification or irresponsible development that is destroying the fabric of our city. And because I put my money where my mouth is, I am not taking money from developers or law enforcement. I will bring my 20 years of advocating for equality and business expertise to City Hall. Join our fight to restore the voices of our residents on the City Council. Let's fight for social justice and a better economy that works for all of us, because this is our city and we all deserve to shine. I'm Sepi Shyne, and I approve this message.